All right, today we're going to break down the really complex history of Venezuela. It is a wild story of incredible wealth, huge political swings, and a truly profound crisis.
So, get this. Venezuela has more proven oil reserves than any other country on the planet. Yep, even more than Saudi Arabia. And yet, it's also the scene of one of the most devastating economic collapses in modern times. So the big question is, how did that happen? That's the paradox we're going to unpack.
To really understand what's happening today, we've got to go back in time. So we're going to walk through 5 key eras in Venezuela's history, from its colonial days all the way to its revolutionary turn. You'll see how each period set the stage for the next one. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, with how the nation itself was formed. And believe me, it was a long and often violent struggle to figure out just what Venezuela was going to be. For a whopping 300 years, Venezuela was a Spanish colony. The entire economy was basically set up to extract resources. We're talking pearls, crops, minerals, you name it. And all that wealth went straight back to Spain, built on the brutal exploitation of the local indigenous people. But then, people started getting new ideas. They were watching the revolutions in America and France and thought, hey, why not us? Led by the legendary Simón Bolívar, they started their own fight for freedom. After a really long war, they finally declared independence, and by 1830, Venezuela was its own nation. But just because you're independent doesn't mean you get peace and quiet. The new republic was incredibly fragile. For most of the 19th century, it was just torn apart by civil wars and the rule of these caudillos, basically powerful regional warlords with their own personal armies who were constantly challenging the government. And then, as the 20th century got going, something was discovered under a lake that would change the country's destiny, completely and forever. Just let that number sink in for a second. 304 billion barrels of oil. That is the largest proven reserve on Earth. This was like hitting the global lottery. It promised this amazing golden future for the entire nation. But a blessing that big often comes with a curse. Economists call it Dutch disease. As all this money flooded into the oil industry, other crucial parts of the economy, like farming and manufacturing, were just left in the dust. They withered away. And that didn't just make the country dependent on oil. It gave the government immense power and tied the whole nation's fate to the crazy ups and downs of the global oil market. So life in Venezuela became this endless roller coaster of boom and bust. During the big oil boom in the 1970s, Venezuela was literally the richest country in Latin America, a symbol of modernity. But when oil prices crashed hard in the 80s, the country's hollowed-out economy was exposed, and that led to massive instability and a whole lot of anger. And it wasn't just about the price of oil. The country's ability to even get the oil out of the ground started to collapse. I mean, just look at this drop. From 3.5 million barrels a day in the 70s to less than 600,000 by 2020. That is a catastrophic fall. This vicious cycle, boom and bust, wealth next to inequality, it created the perfect conditions for a new leader to come along promising a completely radical new way forward. And that leader was Hugo Chavez. He really tapped into all that public anger that had been simmering for decades. He promised that he would use the nation's oil wealth to finally, once and for all, end poverty and corruption. His big idea was what he called the Bolivarian Revolution. It was his own unique take on socialism for the 21st century, and his goal was to completely remake Venezuela's economy and its society. So what did that actually look like? Well, his government took over hundreds of private companies, launched huge social welfare programs, and dramatically increased the state's control over the economy. And how was all this paid for? By another temporary boom in oil prices. But here's the critical, ironic part. Instead of fixing the country's core problem, his policies actually made it much, much worse. Venezuela's dependency on oil became almost total. It got to the point where 95 cents of every single dollar the country earned from exports came from oil. After Chavez died in 2013, his hand-picked successor, Nicolás Maduro, came to power, and he basically inherited a system that was a ticking time bomb, teetering on the edge of collapse. So here's the crucial moment. When oil prices inevitably crashed again, the whole house of cards came tumbling down. You had falling income mixed with years of policies that had crippled the economy's ability to produce anything. It was a recipe for disaster. The result was hyperinflation. And I'm not just talking about high prices. This was a complete economic death spiral. At one point, prices were rising by over 3,000% a year. The money in your pocket became virtually worthless. The human cost of all this was just immense. In just 5 short years between 2015 and 2020, an estimated 2 million people fled the country. That's a staggering number for a nation of about 30 million.
This mass exodus created one of the largest migration crises in the world. Millions of people poured into neighboring countries. I mean, the number of Venezuelans moving to places like Colombia and Chile jumped by over 1,000%. It was an unbelievable humanitarian crisis.
And the political situation is still incredibly volatile. Looking forward, this timeline here just shows one possible scenario for what a political transition could look like in the near future, as the country tries to navigate its way out of this mess. And that really brings us to the fundamental question for Venezuela's future. After a whole century that was defined by the promise and the peril of oil, the country is now facing this monumental challenge of rebuilding itself from the ground up, and maybe for the very first time, without relying on the one resource that both created it and nearly destroyed it.